Hello, I'm Lynn Doyle. Welcome to this week's Meet the Doctors, where we have another great lineup of doctors for you to talk about the latest health news and medical breakthroughs and how they may impact you or a loved one. Coming up on this edition, certified dietitian Robert Newman gives us his take on the latest study on probiotics. That's the good bacteria found in our guts. Can these microorganisms also lower your blood pressure? Well, we're going to find out. Then later, retired NYPD Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik was right in the thick of it on 9/11. Now he is speaking up for the 2,500 Ground Zero rescuers and responders who have fallen ill with cancer. And then later, as always, we'll have our panel of doctors who will be answering your email questions. Please understand the medical advice given on this show is not intended for anyone individually, and we always suggest that you check with your doctor first before making any kind of medical decision. Now for the latest health headlines. At least one American has died from the Ebola virus. 40-year-old Patrick Sawyer, who worked as a top government official in the Liberian Ministry of Finance, was heading back to Minnesota when he was stricken. Unfortunately, he never made it home. In addition, 2 American relief workers, Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Wrightball, also tested positive for this virus while working to combat the deadly disease at a hospital in Liberia. U.S. health officials say there's little risk that the deadly disease will spread to our shores because it only spreads through physical touch. About 2/3 of adults suffer from some sort of lower back pain at some point in their lives. Even Texas Governor Rick Perry admitted his back pain was a major factor in his decision to drop out of the last presidential race. For relief, doctors usually recommend patients take acetaminophen, like Tylenol and Panadol. However, a large trial has shown that acetaminophen doesn't necessarily give better relief than a placebo. You see, about 1,600 people with acute lower back pain took part in this Australian study. Some actually took the actual pain reliever, others took a placebo, and then a third group took both a placebo and a pain reliever. At the end of 3 months, though, 3/4 said they were satisfied with their treatment, whether they received the medicine or not. And in another back pain study, weather really isn't a barometer in determining the onset of back pain. Australian researchers compared 993 cases of back pain sufferers to temperature, wind speeds, humidity, and rain, and found absolutely no correlation to when the back pain started acting up. A minimally invasive procedure performed on about 50,000 women a year during a hysterectomy could actually be spreading cancer. This procedure is called power morcellation, and it uses a device to cut uterine tissue into pieces before removing them through small incisions in the body. Here's the catch. Some women are actually harmed when the device inadvertently slices through tumors the doctors didn't even know were there. That causes cancer cells to spread through the abdomen. The study in the Journal of the American Medical Association said this popular procedure should be discouraged or outright stopped entirely. Now, who doesn't love Italian food? The aromatic herbs rosemary and oregano are often used as seasoning in so many of those delicious recipes. Well, now scientists say that rosemary and oregano could actually be a tasty and natural alternative to prescription pills for diabetics. You see, new research suggests these 2 herbs can reduce the level of glucose in the blood the same way a diabetes drug does for treating the 8% of Americans who suffer from type 2 diabetes. Pray go. Pray go. Well, there's Google Earth and there's Google Body. Now, Google Body is doing something really amazing. It's called a baseline study, and this ambitious project will be exploring the human body. Its aim is to create what could be the fullest picture of what a healthy human being should look like on the inside. The project will collect anonymous genetic and molecular information, and then it's going to use Google's massive computing power to find patterns or biomarkers that are hidden in that information. The point of it all is for medical researchers to be able to detect disease a whole lot earlier. That's it for today's news. Up next, retired NYPD Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik goes to the mat for the 2,500 Ground Zero workers who are battling cancer today. We're going to get his take on all of that and much more when Meet the Doctors continues right after this. There are 2,500 Ground Zero rescuers and responders now battling cancer. Joining us from our Florida studio is Newsmax Deputy Editor Nick Tate. Nick, I don't know about you, but those numbers are devastating to me.
Absolutely true, Lynn. You know, a growing number of Ground Zero first responders are seeking compensation for their illnesses, and as you say, the latest figures show that more than 25 of them now have cancer. Now, that's nearly twice as many cases reported just last year by the CDC and the World Trade Center Health Program at Mount Sinai that's been tracking illnesses among first responders. Now, to put that in perspective, that's about 1 in every 10 to 15 EMTs, firefighters, police, sanitation workers, and other city employees who have contracted these World Trade Center related cancers. Prostate cancer, thyroid, leukemia, and multiple myeloma are among them. Even the CDC has suggested that those numbers, however, may not in fact be the total picture. In fact, a number of folks who have not yet been diagnosed or sought compensation, or who maybe have been treated by private doctors and not the government-funded medical programs, have yet to come forward.
All right, Nick, thank you so much. Who can forget the horrendous and heart-wrenching aftermath of September 11th? I know our next guest will never forget it. He is retired New York City Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik. He was right in the thick of things then, and he continues to be very involved today. He is joining us via Skype. Commissioner, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Lynn.
Are you shocked to hear that there are so many of those people who risked their lives on that September day now battling for their lives some 13 years later?
No, I'm not shocked. I mean, if you've followed this from the beginning, you know, those numbers have increased. You know, just this past Sunday, I was up at Sloan Kettering visiting a retired sergeant, a guy by the name of Danny Spinelli. He has cancer, and I remember in the days and weeks after 9/11, seeing him down at Ground Zero every single day, constantly down there on the pile, and you know, he's one of several thousands of men and women that were there from the NYPD, not to count you know, some 11, 13,000 maybe members of the fire department, another 6,000, 7,000 from correction, the Port Authority police, the EMTs. We had an enormous number of people down there, and when you go back to those photos and you look at what was down there in those first 90 days after the towers were hit, the air is so thick in some places you can't see through it. So it's, you know, it's no wonder that these things still creep up, and, you know, hopefully these people are being taken care of, and most importantly, they're taken care of medically, and their families are taken care of as well, God forbid, in the aftermath of, you know, the worst to come.
Do you believe that they are, in fact, being well taken care of?
You know, I think early on they were. My fear is that the further we get away from September 11th, the less concern there is for them and their families. I hope that's not the case. But, you know, when you think of the threats we faced on 9/11 and in the immediate aftermath, the entire country was supportive. The entire country wanted to fight Al-Qaeda. The entire country, everybody, wanted to fight the battle that had to be fought, and wanted to go after the enemy the new-faced enemy that we found. Those days are over. And I hope that we don't have the same sentiment toward the people that went down there and risked their lives to rescue others, to recover bodies, to remove the debris, and to do what had to be done at the time.
What are you doing to try to make sure that that doesn't happen to those brave individuals?
Well, I think right now the biggest thing is to keep the pressure on the city and the medical facilities. I have to tell you, when I was up at Sloan, Danny, Sergeant Spinelli told me that Sloan has been phenomenal to him and his family. That's good to hear. But I just hope that we can keep the pressure on the city, on the government, to do whatever they have to do to keep, to keep the support there for the members involved and for their family.
I remember interviewing you in the days after September 11th. Obviously, like all Americans, you were devastated as to what had happened to your city and to our country. Now, some 13 years later, when you look back, what kind of impact do you think it's had, not only on you personally, but on our history as a nation?
Well, I think most importantly, it opened our eyes. It opened our eyes to, one, an enemy that has an enormous amount of patience, an enemy that is not going away, an enemy that plans, prepares, and practices every day to attack countries like ours. We've seen just in New York City alone, I think the number is up to 13 or 14 attacks that have been planned and attempted to be carried out in New York City. And then you have additional numbers around the country. That threat isn't going away. And if 9/11 wasn't a reminder and a wake-up call, I don't know what could be. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that's come out of the attacks of September 11th.
And of course now, as you say, we are seeing all of these residual effects on the health and well-being of all of the people who put their lives in danger for us then. What do you hope happens at this point in this country?
Well, I think you have to be supportive of the men and women in your law enforcement community and in your public safety community. You can't ask men and women, whether it's local, state, or federal government,
Right.
whether it's the FBI or whomever. You can't ask these men and women to do a job and then not support them in the aftermath of doing that job and giving them every benefit you can give them to keep them safe and sound and keep their well-being. God forbid something goes wrong, their families have to be looked after.
All right. Police Commissioner Bernie Carrick, thank you so much for your time and for what you continue to do for our first responders. It was lovely to have you with us.
Thanks, Lynn.
While these brave souls worked amongst the rubble, anyone experiencing respiratory irritants or who works with toxic chemicals at work or at home could be in real danger. At minimum, we suggest when working or coming in contact with these kinds of toxins, please protect yourselves by wearing coveralls, safety boots and shoes, and definitely safety glasses and gloves. Okay, now let's talk about something that is really good for your health. You've probably heard a lot about yogurt and how it contains probiotics. That's the good bacteria that helps the digestive tract. Well, now a new study shows these bacteria that live in your gut could actually lower blood pressure too. Certified dietitian Robert Newman is here in our New York studio, and he'll give us the skinny on probiotics and how scientists are discovering it's not just about the yogurt these days. But first, this short break. Do you remember this 1977 commercial for Dannon yogurt?
In Soviet Georgia, there are two curious things about the people. A large part of their diet is yogurt, and a large number of them live past 100. Now, we're not saying that Dannon yogurt will help you live longer, but Dannon low-fat yogurt is a wholesome, natural food rich in nutrition. By the way, 89-year-old Bagrat Tapagwa liked Dannon so much, he ate 2 cups. That pleased his mother very much. Dannon, America's #1 yogurt, is here.
Well, there certainly is some truth to it. You know, yogurt contains certain healthy living bacteria that's actually good for you and hopefully will help you live to a ripe old age. We're joined once again by our Deputy Health Editor, Nick Tate, who's in Florida studios with us. Nick, I thought there was just bad bacteria, but actually now there's good bacteria?
Well, that's right, Lynn. You know, we tend to think of bacteria as always bad, with antibacterial soaps and products all the rage, but many of the trillions of bacteria that live in our digestive tracts are actually good for us. They're good bacteria, and they're essential to our health. Some help us digest food or ward off diseases, and as the latest research shows, they can even help us lower blood pressure and reduce the risk for heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. Now, probiotics are a class of these good bacteria, and they're found not only in yogurt, but foods like aged cheeses and fermented soy products as well.
You have my attention now when you're talking about lowering our blood pressure and other health benefits. What did the researchers find out about that?
Well, what they did is they looked at 9 studies of people who ate foods like yogurt that contain strains principally of what's called lactobacillus. It's a form of good bacteria. And they tended to have lower blood pressure than those folks who don't eat them. Now, most of the reductions were relatively modest, but the research really echoes what past studies have shown, in that probiotics can be really an important element to maintaining a balance of healthy, good bacteria and squeezing out the kind of bad bacteria in our guts. I've even heard some medical researchers refer to the digestive system as a kind of second nervous system that regulates metabolism and has an influence on other body functions as well.
Is there a downside at all to consuming probiotics?
As far as we know, there really is not. I mean, unless you are allergic to some of the dairy products that probiotics are in, there really is no downside. And in fact, the latest research, the folks who conducted the latest research said that consuming probiotics should really be a routine part of a healthy diet. Just as we know we should eat lots of fresh fruit and vegetables and lean protein, maybe we should be adding yogurt and aged cheeses and maybe some fermented soy products to our diets as well, Lynn.
All right, thanks a lot, Nick. Always great to have you with us. We're joined now here in our New York studio by clinical dietitian Robert Newman. We'd like to get some more information and expand on the information that Nick just related to us. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Lynn.
So we heard that this new study said that there was some significance with the lower blood pressure, but not tremendous, not enough to change the way people approach their medicine.
I think the study showed that it took about at least 2 months on the probiotics, and they feel it may have been by lowering the cholesterol, which it does have that effect. It lowers the bad cholesterol, the LDL, and raises the HDL. So that might have an effect on the blood vessels.
So in fact, it's not just for our intestines, which is what I was thinking it might be, but it's actually good for the entire body.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about probiotics, we're talking about the home of being the gut. The gut is lined with about 70 to 80% of the immune system of the entire body, which is really mind-blowing when you think about it, that it houses such a tremendous effect on your whole system. So by keeping that proper balance of healthy bacteria to bad bacteria, you're enhancing your immune system for fighting any kind of disease, from cancer to respiratory infections.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask you. Let's expand on what types of benefits it has and what parts of the body could actually benefit from probiotics.
Okay. So again, it is systemic, as we like that word. It will affect respiratory by balancing that immune system, by taking some of the burden of the immune response systemically by supporting what is really interfacing with the lining of the intestinal tract. It has effects on chemicals that are made in the gut. When we look at cancers, there are carcinogenic DNA changes, and many times these bacteria will help resolve that and get rid of those chemicals.
So it's really good for us from head to toe.
Yes.
What happens though if you don't like the foods that generate the probiotics, the yogurts, the soy, the other fermented cheeses, that kind of thing?
Well, there are other fermented foods. In particular, the Koreans have brought in kimchi. I mean, it's in all the different health food stores now. It's in Trader Joe's, etc. It's a sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is an amazing fermented food that will increase the gut flora. So.
What about something like wine? Wine's a fermented liquid.
Yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't have the probiotics. The alcohol, unfortunately, the alcohol will kill the bacteria.
So all the good that the probiotics does, then alcohol could
alter
counter
that. Absolutely.
Okay. When we hear foods being described as non-fat foods, what effect do they have on probiotics? Do they contain the same thing, or are they totally different?
Well, essentially, I think it's the milk sugar, the lactose, that the bacteria really thrive on. So I'm not sure whether the low-fat or regular fat food will have the impact. Nick had mentioned the lactobacillus. When people are supplementing this, they should really get the 2 species. One is lactobacillus, and there are other strains, and then the bifidobacteria is the other one that has equal benefit.
What if you are allergic to the foods that are high in probiotics? Are there alternatives, or is there something that we can take over the counter, or perhaps natural ingredients that we can
there
include?
are certainly really high quality supplements. There are some inferior supplements. What I always recommend to my patients is go into the health food store and get the powdered version of the probiotic, as many a strain as you can get.
Okay.
And it would be in a refrigerated section. So you find they're actually much more viable in terms of activity in the body.
Okay, and speaking of Activia is one of those yogurts that's generated a lot of attention through its marketing plan and that kind of thing. And then we hear about Greek yogurts. Consumers are sometimes confused about which one is better, or if one actually is better than the other.
No.
Can you clarify for us?
Well, I would prefer the Greek yogurt. The Greek
Okay.
yogurt definitely has a higher protein level, so it's going to keep your blood sugar at a steadier level. All the advertising with Activia, they actually were sued back in 2010, and they with the Federal Trade Commission, and they resolved the $21 million suit because they were making claims that they really should not have been making.
I guess that's something that we as consumers really have to be aware of. We have to do our research, do our homework, listen to people like you, and then make the decision as to what's right and what claims are really true or not.
Right. Yeah.
We always love to have you here. Great advice.
Thank you.
I'm going
Good
to
to
go
see you
home
again.
and add all of those probiotics to my personal diet now. Give my
Watch
gut
steam
a good steam cleaning. Good to have you here. Okay, we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, you know what's up, our panel of doctors who will be answering all of your email questions. Please stay with us. Meet the Doctors continues right after this. Welcome back to Meet the Doctors. I'm Lynn Doyle. It's time now for our panel of doctors to answer your email questions. This is one of my favorite parts of the show because it actually gives us a chance to hear from you, and you get to hear from this great panel of doctors that we've put together, including emergency medicine physician Dr. Peter Hibbert, who is joining us from our Florida studio. It's good to have him back with us. And joining me here in our New York studio is Dr. Richard Lipton, who is the head of the Division of Cognitive Aging and Dementia at Montefiore and director of the Einstein Aging Study. Welcome, Dr. Lipton. Good to have you with us as well.
Great to be here.
You ready to answer some questions for us?
Ready to do my best. Sure.
Okay, well, our first question is for you, and this is one that I think a lot of us out there can relate to, particularly of a certain age. Our viewer asks, my husband is becoming very forgetful. It's not that he's old, he's only 56, but he jokes that he's having, quote, another senior moment. What do you think of that? What do you make of it?
Well, you know, everyone talks about how there's an epidemic of Alzheimer's disease, and that's certainly true that as the population ages, more and more people are getting dementia. But even more common than the epidemic of Alzheimer's disease is the epidemic of fear about Alzheimer's disease. The reality is it's perfectly normal to do certain kinds of forgetting, and you know that may happen because we just are distracted and multitasking. We put our glasses down, don't remember where we put them. We walk into a room and then forget why we're in that room. So those kinds of forgetful episodes are really perfectly normal. When people forget things, and forgetting names when you meet a bunch of people at a party is also perfectly normal. Some kinds of forgetting, however, are not normal, and when people forget things that are really important to them or lose the ability to do things they used to be able to do well, plan to cook a meal, go shopping, lose the ability to balance a checkbook, those sorts of functional limitations may suggest problems, and then it's a good idea to see a doctor.
Okay, so to our viewer, we would say you're probably just experiencing what all of us experience at a certain age, but if you feel really concerned, seek out medical advice.
Exactly right.
Okay, Dr. Hibbert, are you ready for one?
Yes, Lynn, thank you.
This viewer writes, I am a 41-year-old man. I weigh 185 pounds and my cholesterol is very high. I am on 2 statins and have been taking them for 2 years. What else could I do to lower this number? Are there foods that I could eat, perhaps, that might help?
The first thing that strikes me is here's a gentleman who isn't that old. He's got very high cholesterols, but we don't know the rest of his risk factors. We don't know his height, we don't know his family history, hypertension, diabetes, heart disease. We don't know the rest of his story. Granted that his cholesterols are high, but he should not normally be on 2 statins. 1 statin and the choice of either a low power or high power statin. Obviously, he should be on a high power statin. And our diets play about a 20% role in the total values of our cholesterol, serum cholesterol. But in the end, the liver makes cholesterol. So if you have a genetic tendency towards making cholesterol, then the statins are actually the thrust of our recommendations nowadays. The LDL targets that we used to have are gradually being faded out, and we're starting to look at the total risk factors in all areas, not just the cholesterol risk factors. So there's a lot that he can do in diet. He can add a high fiber diet, even add a bit of psyllium 2-3 times a day. Bring that dietary fat level down a little bit in his diet and address the other things that may be precipitating or aggravating his cholesterols. Perhaps he's diabetic and out of control. That needs to be addressed aggressively, perhaps more so than his cholesterols by themselves.
Let's hope he takes that advice.
There are also other things. Well, there's lots of other things we can do. In fact, in another week, there's actually discussion of using chelation in some patients, but I'm not going to get into that because that gets into a controversial area right now. But leave it to say that 1 statin, properly dosed, is the thrust of his treatment, at least it should be, in conjunction with a dietary consultation with a dietitian. And that's a start, and addressing the other health issues he has as well.
Good advice, as always. Let's go to our next question. Can a person get dementia from abusing medications for a certain number of years? Dr. Lipton?
Well, so the first thing to say is just a definition of dementia. So dementia is a syndrome where people develop cognitive difficulties in one or more area of mental function. Usually memory is one of the areas, but in addition, planning, language, navigating. So if people acquire a loss of function in 2 cognitive domains, we call that the dementia syndrome. Certain medications can cause the dementia syndrome. The good news is when medications do that, it's almost always fully reversible. So drugs like tricyclic antidepressants, drugs like scopolamine, even some blood pressure drugs can cause the dementia syndrome. And so when someone goes to the doctor with memory and other cognitive complaints, one of the first and most important things to do is just to review the list of medications the person is on and adjust the medications to eliminate drugs as a reversible cause of the dementia syndrome.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Hibbert, one last question before we take our next break. This one says, my doctor suggests that oat bran cereal can contribute to lower cholesterol. Can you give us a very short answer whether it's true or false?
True. Soluble fiber added to your diet may decrease your cholesterol anywhere from 10 to 20%.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll have more of your questions, so please stay with us. Our panel of doctors will answer your questions here on Meet the Doctors right after this. So we are back with our panel of doctors who are answering your email questions. We're joined in our Florida studio by emergency medicine physician Dr. Peter Hibbert. And here in the studio with me in New York is Dr. Richard Lipton, who is the head of the Division of Cognitive Aging and Dementia at Montefiore and director of the Einstein Aging Study. We're happy to have both of them with us. More importantly, we're happy that you give us the opportunity to answer some of these questions, which obviously are so important to you. Dr. Hibbert, we want to go back to you in Florida, see if you can give us an answer to this one. It says, a lady friend in her 50s is suffering from hyperthyroidism, but the prescribed medications she takes often make her feel worse than she really has before the medicine. What would you suggest?
It sounds like she needs to beeline back to her doctor in a hurry. There could be several things going on. It could be that the medicine's not working and she's very much hyperthyroid, and could be a dangerous situation, or it may have flattened her out so completely where she doesn't have any thyroid hormone at all. So I can't tell which end of that spectrum she's in. In any event, she needs to take a beeline back to the office tomorrow.
Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Lipton here in the studio with me. This is a very interesting question. Can drinking red wine help prevent the onset of dementia?
So there are many U-shaped curves in medicine where not enough isn't so good and too much isn't so good, but if you get things just right, it can be helpful. And red wine is one of those things. So studies show, including the Einstein Aging Study, the one I direct, shows that if people drink 1 or 2 glasses of red wine a day, that reduces the risk of developing dementia and Alzheimer's disease in particular, relative to people who don't drink at all or who drink more than 2 glasses a day. Now, I wouldn't necessarily suggest that people who don't drink start drinking as a dementia prevention strategy, but I think people who drink moderately are likely doing themselves more good than harm unless there's some specific reason they shouldn't be drinking.
Boy, I can tell you, all across America, there are a lot of people with smiles on their faces, including me. Are there things that we can do to try to prevent dementia or Alzheimer's? Let's say it runs in our family. Is there something that we can do to thwart it and to keep it at bay other than the red wine?
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of things that people can do to reduce their risk of Alzheimer's disease. And at the Alzheimer meetings, which were just 2 weeks ago in Copenhagen, there's a major focus on remediable risk factors. So for years now, we've talked about how to prevent heart attack and stroke by managing blood pressure, managing diabetes, managing cholesterol, maintaining normal body weight. And in fact, all those things we do to protect our hearts and to protect our brains from stroke also seem to have a protective effect against cognitive aging and the onset of Alzheimer's disease as well.
That's great to know.
Yeah, so in addition to other things, cognitive engagement can be very helpful. So our study actually was the crossword puzzle study that showed that people who do crossword puzzles, play chess, play games that are cognitively engaging, help themselves. Physical activity is also helpful for dementia prevention. So there's a lot that people can do.
Keep that mind stimulated. All right, back to Dr. Hibbert in Florida. Here's a question for you. How soon after a diverticulosis attack and completion of Cipro meds can you return to a more normal diet? Also, could you suggest some foods that I should eat to possibly avoid another attack?
Diverticulitis is where there's an outpouching of bowel, a little pocket that gets infected, inflamed, and settles down with antibiotic treatment much of the time. And in some cases, it complicates. Most of the time, once we've got a handle on the diverticulitis itself, you can resume a normal diet. Much of the time, when you have the acute episode, you're placed on fluids, and as soon as the pain and discomfort settle down, a normal diet can be resumed right away. As far as preventing, a high-fiber diet is preventive for you. A high-fiber diet in your bowel decreases the pressure inside the lumen, and actually is felt to decrease the number of episodes or flares of diverticulitis by assuming or adopting a high-fiber diet.
I understand that that is very painful when it does occur. Is it something that happens to the average person, or is there a pre-existing condition that perhaps prompts it?
I wouldn't say the average person can expect to have a bout of diverticulitis at all. There's a genetic component attached to this, and by far the majority of people don't get an episode of diverticulitis.
Okay, thank you very much. And our question for Dr. Lipton. We touched on this before about the differences between dementia and Alzheimer's. Maybe you could expand on it a bit for this viewer who is confused, how to clarify between the two.
Okay, sure. So dementia is the broader category. So it refers to cognitive problems usually acquired late in life of any cause. So there are many, many causes of dementia. As we said already, taking the wrong medications can cause dementia. Hypothyroidism can cause dementia. Vitamin B12 deficiency, multiple strokes, and Alzheimer's can cause dementia. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of the dementia syndrome in older adults, but it is very much a specific cause. The other thing that's worth understanding is, as a medical student, I was taught if someone has memory complaints, first you figure out do they have dementia or not, and then you determine the specific cause. But now we recognize that Alzheimer's disease, which can be viewed as a disorder where certain abnormal proteins accumulate in the brain and actually poison nerve cells and interfere with thinking. Alzheimer's disease begins many years before Alzheimer's dementia develops. And in a way, that's a very good thing because much current research is focused on people who have Alzheimer's disease who have not yet developed cognitive disruption, where the goal is to intervene to keep the disorder from progressing and to keep dementia from developing.
Are we seeing that it is a hereditary disease? If a family member has it, that there's a likelihood you will get it?
Yeah, so about half the risk of having Alzheimer's disease is determined by genetic factors. Identical twins are more likely to have Alzheimer's in common than fraternal twins, but environmental factors play a major role as well. There's some rare forms of Alzheimer's that typically begin in the 40s and 50s that are strongly inherited, where if you have the gene, you're very likely to get the disorder. But for most of us, genetic factors can be modified by taking those protective steps that we were talking about.
As always, thank you so much for providing that useful information. Dr. Hibbert, it was wonderful to have you with us as well. And to our viewers, we thank you for providing such good questions so that we can give you such great informative answers. We'd like to thank all of you for watching this edition of Meet the Doctors. I'm Lynn Doyle. We hope that you stay happy and healthy. We'll see you the next time.